Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be taking a pretty fascinating look at a 1964 lecture by Neville Goddard
Okay.
called The Law of Liberty. And if you've ever wondered how your inner thoughts and feelings actually create the reality that you experience,
Right.
then buckle up, because this deep dive is going to be tailor-made for you.
It really is.
Goddard, he was a lot like, I think, Lord Lindsay, right?
Yeah.
He advised clergymen to just see if their teachings practically work.
Oh, yeah.
He says, try it, test it, and then share the result.
That's a good way to put it.
So our mission together today is really to explore whether this law
Right.
really holds up based on some pretty compelling material.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that grabs you right away with Goddard is he has this really straightforward approach. He's not
Yeah.
asking you to just believe.
Right.
He's urging you to actually experiment for yourself.
Yeah.
So for you, the listener, that's really a crucial point right off the bat, is that knowledge you gain through your own experience is so much more powerful than just accepting someone else's ideas.
Right. And to really get us going here, Goddard, he often refers to the poet and the mystic William Blake.
Oh, yeah.
And I love this quote. I think you will too.
I do too.
All that you behold, though it appears without, it is within, in your imagination, of which this world of mortality is but a shadow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Goddard is not just sharing like a really nice, poetic thought here.
Right.
He actually emphasizes that Blake really meant this literally.
Wow.
So just think about that for a second.
That is huge.
Right.
Like, that literal interpretation is key for you to really grasp this whole concept, because it completely flips our usual understanding of reality
Yeah.
as this thing out there that's totally separate from what's going on inside of us. Instead, it's suggesting that there's this really intimate and creative connection between your inner world and the world that you experience every single day. So true. And then Goddard, he kind of brings in a part of the Bible that I think some people find a bit puzzling,
Right.
which is from the 6th chapter of John,
Mm.
which is often referred to as the chapter of secession.
Okay, interesting.
And the part that really tripped up a lot of Jesus's followers was the statement where he said, "No one can come unto me unless the Father who sent me draws him."
Right, right.
And of course, this caused a lot of people to just kind of turn away.
Yeah, I can see why.
What stood out to you about that part?
You know what's so interesting for you as the listener to consider is how exclusive that statement seems.
Yeah.
Like, just on the surface level.
Yeah.
It brings up this whole question of, like, who has the power? Who gets drawn and who doesn't?
Yeah.
And that's the very puzzle that Goddard is trying to unlock here through the lens of his teachings.
Exactly. And the central question that Goddard really lays out,
Right.
and that we're really going to dig into today for you, is this.
Okay.
Can you truly accept that your inner imaginative acts
Are the very seeds
Yeah.
that grow into the fruit of your outer world?
Wow.
And does this actually apply not just to events,
Right.
but even to the people that you encounter in your life?
That's where it starts to get really, really practical, right?
Right.
Like, it's one thing to think that, my thoughts might affect
Yeah.
my mood or, what I decide to do.
Right.
But it's a whole different ballgame to actually start considering that your inner world is shaping the very people and situations that you find yourself in.
Okay, so let's kind of unpack this a little bit more.
Right.
We readily understand
Yeah.
this natural law of identical harvest
Oh, yeah?
in the physical world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Plant a tomato seed.
Okay.
You get a tomato plant.
Yeah.
As Goddard points out, we see this literally everywhere.
Right.
With plants, animals. Everything reproduces after its own kind.
Right.
That makes sense to us.
Makes perfect sense.
Right.
It does. But that well-established idea of cause and effect in the physical world, that gives you a familiar starting point, right? Like, it's logical. You can see it happening.
Right.
So the real leap here, and this is where I think the challenge is for a lot of people, is to extend that same principle to the seemingly less concrete world of your thoughts and your imagination.
Exactly. And where a lot of us struggle, according to Goddard, is accepting that even complete strangers
Wow.
that walk into our lives are, in a way, drawn to us
Yeah.
by our own inner state.
Interesting.
And this really connects back to that idea that he keeps coming back to,
Okay.
I and my Father are one,
Right.
with Father being this term for our own imagination, that Christ's spirit within each of us.
So for you, the listener, think of that Christ spirit within as that inherent creative power,
Right.
that spark of imagination that
Right.
resides within you.
Beautiful. And this concept pops up
yeah.
in a lot of different
Yeah.
spiritual and philosophical traditions, often pointing toward that idea of like a fundamental interconnectedness
Right.
and a single source for everything.
Right.
So Goddard is interpreting this specifically
Yeah.
as your individual imagination
Right.
being the active creative force in your life.
Right. He then introduces this, I think, really powerful thought,
Okay.
which is that the spirit in you, which he identifies with Jesus Christ, quoting Galatians 2:20,
Right.
I have been crucified with Christ. It is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Knows from the very beginning
Okay.
whether you truly believe in this law.
So for you, that suggests that there is a deep level of awareness within yourself.
Right.
A connection to this creative power. That's actually aware
Right.
of your conscious beliefs. And even those beliefs that you might not be fully aware of.
Right. So it's like,
So it hints at a level of responsibility for your inner world that we often overlook. And this brings us to the idea of self-betrayal,
ooh, interesting.
which is really fascinating.
Yeah.
So Goddard argues that deep down, we all have this inherent knowing that our own imaginative power is the source of what we experience in life.
Okay.
Yet we often resist taking responsibility for it,
Oh, yeah.
especially when things go wrong or we encounter people that are difficult.
That resistance is completely understandable.
Yeah.
It's much easier to blame outside factors.
Right.
Or just bad luck when things don't go our way.
Yeah.
But what Goddard is asking you to consider
Yeah.
is that those external situations might actually be reflecting unacknowledged beliefs or assumptions that you're holding within yourself.
Right.
And to really accept that,
Yeah.
that requires a significant shift
Right.
in how you see the world and a willingness to really look inward.
So true. And here's where this really kind of comes to life.
Okay.
Because Goddard shares a really detailed story from a letter that he received. And it is mind-blowing. This writer, he was really stuck on a story that he was working on.
Oh.
And he felt the dialogue was strong and his scenes were really good.
Okay.
But something just wasn't clicking.
Right. And I'm sure that resonates with anyone who's ever tried to create anything.
Right.
Sometimes, all the individual pieces seem right.
Yeah.
But that final product, it just doesn't quite come together.
Yeah.
So this writer, I think he had the self-awareness to realize that the problem wasn't just in the details,
Right.
but in something more fundamental to the story itself.
So on a Sunday morning walk,
Okay.
this writer decided to try a really interesting imaginative exercise. He mentally put himself in the shoes of Robert Louis Stevenson.
Oh, wow.
After Stevenson had just finished writing a really good story.
Okay.
And he tried to really feel that sense of accomplishment and satisfaction.
Wow.
Right.
That's a really cool technique.
Yeah.
So for you, what you're going there is you're using empathy and imaginative identification to shift your own internal state. It's a way to bypass your usual critical thinking and tap into a different level of creative energy by embodying the feeling that you desire.
And the results were almost immediate.
Wow.
When he got back home.
Okay.
And he started talking with his wife about the problems in the story. Solutions to every single issue just flooded into his mind. As though, he wrote, someone standing behind me prompted me.
Have you ever experienced anything like that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's that feeling of just sudden inspiration or insight that happens after you've been so focused on a problem, and then you step away, you allow your subconscious to work on it.
Right.
So in this context, as Goddard would see it, that feeling of being prompted could actually be interpreted as your own inner creative power at work.
And adding another really interesting layer to this is that the writer's wife, at that exact same time, just generally said, wonderful things are happening. And Goddard even points out the humor of this, right? Because they were together all the time.
Yeah.
But it does kind of suggest this shared positive feeling.
It does.
In the atmosphere.
It really does.
Right.
Yeah, so that shared positive expectation could very well have created this environment where those creative solutions could emerge more easily.
Right.
So it highlights for you how a positive inner state, whether it's individual or shared, can really foster those positive outcomes.
But here's where the story takes a truly bizarre turn.
Okay.
Later that day, while taking a shower, the writer had a really vivid recollection of a very similar experience from 6 years earlier, where a story just seemed to be dictated to him in the same way.
Wow.
But the truly mind-blowing part is what he realized.
Okay. What's that?
The main character from that 6-year-old story was named Eddie. And this fictional character shared a whole list of incredibly specific...
So this is the real crux of the story. This is that aha moment that makes you sit up and take notice, because the sheer number and the very specific nature of these parallels between this imagined character and the real person are so far beyond coincidence that it really challenges our everyday understanding of how reality actually works.
I mean, we're talking about mild insanity that led to commitment.
Wow.
Periodic run-ins with the police and subsequent releases. Wow. A limp in his right leg. The way that the townspeople reacted to him, even living in a tent outside of town, which was the Hollywood Hills for the real Eddie. Similar clothing.
Wow.
And this intense fascination with atomic fallout. Including a hoax in the story and a homemade space needle pipe.
Oh, wow.
And a fear of atmospheric disturbance.
The level of detail is absolutely uncanny.
Right.
It really points to what Goddard is arguing here, which is that there's a much deeper connection between the writer's imagination and the actual manifestation of reality than we typically consider possible.
And the writer also mentioned the identical feeling he had towards both the fictional character he created and the real person, Eddie.
That emotional resonance is really important for you to take note of, because it suggests that the underlying feeling, that energetic imprint of the character that this writer imagined, was consistent with the real person, even beyond the specific details that he consciously chose to share. It's like that essential flavor of the character was the same.
And what's also fascinating is that even when he deliberately left out the limp and words like unwanted and rejected, when he was describing this old character to his wife, she immediately recognized who he was talking about. She knew it was Eddie.
So what does that tell us? It really shows you that the underlying feeling, the energetic imprint of this character that was imagined was consistent with the real person, even beyond the specific details
So true.
that he consciously shared.
The writer, understandably, then humorously said he was worried about meeting other characters that he'd created in the flesh. And he even referenced Goddard's book, The Law and the Promise, and the chapter titled, There Is No Fiction. And he even mused about how it might be more comforting to believe in an outside God rather than being solely responsible for everything he experiences.
That's a very human response, I think, to this kind of profound and potentially overwhelming realization, because the responsibility of being the primary creator of your own reality can be both incredibly empowering, but also at times very daunting. So the idea of an external force to either blame or to credit
can sometimes feel like a more comfortable explanation.
The writer finished his letter by asking Goddard to keep it. Saying that it could serve as potential proof of both insanity in the eyes of the, conventional world, and sanity in terms of understanding the true nature of creation, as Goddard describes it.
That really highlights for you how radical these ideas can seem when you fully embrace this law of liberty. You feel like you're stepping outside of the generally accepted norms of how the world works. It requires a fundamental shift in perception of reality.
Goddard then connects this really incredible story back to that potentially controversial statement from the 6th chapter of John. No one can come unto me unless the Father who sent me draws him. And Goddard's interpretation, which I think is key for you here, is that we're the ones doing the drawing.
We draw everyone into our world, whether we perceive them as good or bad or indifferent.
Interesting.
Based on our own inner thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions. So, for example, if you tend to be mistrustful, you might just find yourself surrounded by untrustworthy people.
So that interpretation is really interesting because it reframes that seemingly exclusive statement in the Bible. It's shifting that power from this external father figure to your own inner state.
Right.
So it's suggesting that you are, in a very real sense, the magnet that's attracting the people and circumstances that make up your reality.
To further illustrate this really powerful idea, Goddard shares a personal story about his own separation and desire to get a divorce so he could marry his current wife. He was in this really difficult legal situation because divorce laws in New York at the time were quite restrictive.
So this is a great example for you of how Goddard was actually applying the principles that he's teaching in his own life.
Right.
He's taking that theory out of the abstract and showing you how he tries to use it in a very practical way.
So he put the law into practice by sleeping. As if he was already happily married to the woman that he desired. And what then unfolded was this really unexpected series of events.
Like what?
His dancing partner suddenly told him she saw him as a brother.
Oh, wow.
His estranged wife was arrested for shoplifting. Which was completely out of character for her.
Wow.
And then Goddard himself was unexpectedly summoned to court.
It sounds like a movie.
Right.
Yeah, it really does.
Crazy.
And all of these seemingly unrelated events, as Goddard interprets them, they all played a part in clearing the path for his desired outcome, even though he couldn't have consciously planned any of it.
So in court, Goddard, he surprisingly found himself pleading on behalf of his estranged wife, which resulted in her receiving a suspended sentence. And then immediately after the court proceedings, she offered him the long-awaited divorce papers.
Interesting.
Goddard's conclusion from all of this.
What is that?
He was the culprit. His inner assumption of being free to marry had somehow orchestrated the circumstances necessary for his divorce to happen.
Wow.
And even his plea in court influenced his wife's cooperation.
So for you as the listener, the power of this anecdote really lies in how it demonstrates the potential for your inner assumptions to actually shape these external events, even the actions of other people. It suggests that there's a really subtle but incredibly powerful interconnectedness at play.
He then reiterates, I think, a really crucial point, which is that we are, in a sense, the unseen authors of our own experiences. And therefore, we shouldn't be so quick to condemn others who are simply playing out roles that we have perhaps unconsciously created through our own inner world.
That's such a powerful call for compassion.
Isn't it?
If you can begin to accept responsibility for your own creations, it naturally becomes so much harder to judge those who appear in your life, even when they're playing challenging roles. It really encourages this deeper level of understanding.
So Goddard then goes back to Peter's confession in John 6.68. To whom would we go? You have the words of eternal life. And he connects this to the revelation in Matthew 16:17, where Peter identifies Jesus as the Christ, the Son of the living God. A revelation that Jesus says came from the Father who is in heaven, whom Jesus then identifies as being one with himself. The Holy One of God, Goddard says, is that very creative presence within each of us.
So for you, what this does is it really brings that theological framework back to Goddard's central idea of individual creative power. So it's suggesting that the divine isn't something separate and external, but rather it's an inherent aspect of your own being, your own imagination.
And he even touches on the writer's humorous desire to go to sleep again, to kind of avoid the responsibility of his created characters, walking around, echoing Jesus's words. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do.
Wow.
And Goddard emphasizes that the world, in a way, is under the spell of these often unconscious, imaginative creators.
It really does highlight for you the unconscious nature of your creative power. You are constantly imagining and creating. But you might not always be aware of the extent of your influence or the consequences of your inner world playing out in your external reality.
Goddard then circles back to his original encouragement, which is to just try it. He urges you to personally experiment with this law of imagination in your own life. And to trust your own inner knowing, even if you only grasp a little portion of the concept at first.
Absolutely. So the invitation for you is to take this beyond just that intellectual understanding and actually test it out in your own life. Observe what happens when you start to consciously direct your imagination.
He then revisits Blake's quote about the thorns and thistles in a barren land being the result of these suppressed natural urges. And he contrasts this mystical view with a botanist's very scientific explanation.
So that analogy is so effective in illustrating how these unseen inner causes can have really tangible outer effects. It encourages you to look beyond just the surface of your experience and really consider those underlying imaginative roots.
And Goddard, he concludes his lecture with Blake's really powerful declaration. Man is all imagination, and God is man and exists in us and we in him. The eternal body of man is the imagination, and that is God himself.
It's a very bold statement. So for you, it equates human imagination with that very essence of divinity. It really underscores that immense creative potential that resides within each of us.
He then just briefly touches on the practical application of all this. So if you desire something, like let's say you want more money, really spend some time imagining and feeling what it would be like to already possess it. And he emphasizes that personal experimentation is key.
Absolutely.
Quoting Fawcett, the secret of imagining is the greatest of all problems, to the solution of which everyone should aspire.
So that really puts the power in your hands. It shifts the focus from passively wishing for things to actively engaging your imagination, coupled with that feeling of already having what you desire as that driving force for actually creating your reality.
He also mentions that interesting experience that many people have of feeling like they're being prompted with solutions when they really focus their imagination on a problem. And he even links this to potentially accessing deeper levels of consciousness or even the influence of great thinkers from the past like Blake.
Yeah, so that speaks to this idea of the interconnectedness of consciousness. Like you might be tapping into this larger pool of wisdom, or even the lingering influence of these past creative minds through your own imaginative faculty.
It's fascinating, right?
It's a really cool idea for you to consider.
Finally, he circles back to that really powerful statement from his book. There is no fiction. He reminds us that our creations, even the ones we might dread or label as unreal, are actually integral parts of our overall experience.
This reinforces the idea for you that everything you imagine, whether you consciously think of it as real or just as a fantasy, has a potential to influence your lived experience. It really blurs those lines between your inner and outer world.
So as we kind of bring this deep dive into Neville Goddard's The Law of Liberty to a close, we really encourage you to take some time to personally explore the implications of these ideas in your own life.
To take a moment to just reflect on the possibility that everyone you encounter and every circumstance you experience might in some way be a direct reflection of your own inner imaginative activity.
And here's a final and I think really provocative thought for you to kind of mull over. If your imagination truly is the fundamental creative power of your reality, then what kind of world are you currently imagining? And what incredible possibilities might consciously and deliberately directing that imagination hold for your future?
That's a great question for you to ask yourself.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, this was great.
For this really fascinating deep dive into the Law of Liberty.
Absolutely.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.